Greetings, ladies and gents. Welcome back to the Craft Hammer. I'm your host, Stefan. I hope you've had a wonderful Christmas period, a happy new year, and in today's video, we're getting right back into it with a fairly important, but I'm sure it will be a bit of a contentious topic. How exactly do you choose your faction or whatever force that you want in Warhammer 40k, and making sure that you stick with it so that you're able to field a decent force on the battlefield. Now, I know that the title of the video might be a bit trying to catch you out, saying that you've chosen your army wrong, and there is a reason behind this. I see this quite a lot when we have new people coming into the hobby. They are given very vague feedback on how to choose a force, or as I would like to call it, toxic positivity, where people just say, well, do whatever you want, whatever you think is cool, it doesn't matter, just however you feel like it, just go for it and you'll have a good time. And in the short run, that person does have somewhat of a decent time, because obviously it's a new hobby, it's something that they're just getting into and everything seems new and sparkly in a sense. But eventually that person, you see it so often, Facebook posts, I'm selling all of my models, I'm selling all of my books, I'm getting out of the hobby, it's not for me, it's not what I thought it was, I'm not able to do the models that I want or paint whatever I want, it's not something that I like. So this is why we have decided to do this video. It's something that I've definitely noticed over a long period of time. I've also talked with other people within the hobby, and they've also had similar inclinings on how people are starting and why they're leaving so soon once they start. Now, this doesn't mean that I am trying to state that the hobby is dying, nor am I saying that people are leaving in droves. This is to help new beginners who want to get into this hobby, and more particularly they want to actually enjoy the hobby for a long time and not just have it as a short period of a financial sink into some models that then they try to sell at a much lower price or they just throw out, etc. This is to help people effectively choose what faction they're going to collect. And in this scenario, we are not going to look at someone who is only in the hobby because they only like the books, or you are just here to paint/build anything that kind of fancies your pickle. No, we're going to look at someone who has an intent of picking a faction, collecting between 1.5 to 2.5 thousand points of models so that they can build, paint, and then eventually play in games, maybe even up to tournaments. Now, I know that some people, they do like to focus just on the tournaments themselves, and by doing that I also see that some of them do burn themselves out much quicker, as they're mostly just focused on the gaming part without really having a connection to their actual forces that they're collecting, which, as I said, I do see it quite often, and they do burn themselves out much quicker than if they were also participating in the rest of the hobby. But we are going to look at the new person who wants to collect, build, paint, and then play a game, not just have small little bits and not the whole hobby as a whole. Yes, the premise is that you are choosing your army wrong, because most of the time when you go online and you're asking for people's help on how to choose things, they generally just say the rule of cool, which is a small component and it's not the whole picture. And we're going to look at other things that you should be taking into consideration so that you can most effectively join the hobby and not put yourself in a situation where you're starting to have small bits here and there that you're disliking, which then eventually lead to you leaving the hobby. So let's get into some of the points that I think you should be keeping in mind when you're picking your first Warhammer faction, or maybe you are someone who is already in the hobby, isn't quite happy, and doesn't really understand why. Maybe some of these points might ring true for you, so it could be something that you might take into consideration. Since it is the new year, most people like to start new armies right now, so let's get into the first point and talk about the things that I think you should be keeping in mind. The first And foremost point, ironically enough, we're actually going to go to the end of the hobby, which is the gaming part. And the reason why is because there's no point in going through all the other aspects and then find out that you don't like how you are playing. If you're going to tournaments, things will obviously change over time. Certain aspects of the game will be a bit more focused on finding specific objectives, being able to destroy your enemy in a particular way, being able to outmaneuver them. There are a variety of ways that can be played, and some armies do focus a lot on more movement, objective control type of scenarios. But the most important part here that will affect pretty much most armies and your enjoyment of the game is understanding whether you like to be at range or in close combat. Yes, some armies can do both. They can field things that can shoot at range, and they can field things that are able to get into close combat, but some armies do focus more towards ranged or again towards combat. So this is something that you really need to ask yourself how you like to play, and the best way to look at it is from video games perspective. Do you enjoy games where you are able to shoot the enemy from a far distance, or do you prefer the ones where you have your sword and you go in and you start bashing people? This is an important thing to ask yourself, because it is not really ideal that you choose a faction because you think it looks really cool and you're hoping that you could get into combat. So if you think that the Tau look very cool and they have those Gundam looking robots, they are not really suited for close combat, and you're sort of kicking your feet out from under you if you're choosing them because you want to push them into combat. Most likely you will then have to go towards the Kroot, which may not be what you were looking for. So this is something that you just need to be careful when you're choosing your force. It is important, since when you are going to be playing, the whole culmination of everything else, all of the effort that you put into the building and into the painting, will go down the drain if you do not like how you're actually playing those models. My suggestion here would be to first figure out what type of playing you like to do. Obviously some factions have the ability to switch in between, so that could be something that you take into consideration when you are choosing. Maybe you will choose something like the Space Marines, which obviously is one of the most liked factions because it is easy to paint, build, but also versatile in how they're able to play. They have a lot of options, which then they can switch between ranged, melee, vehicles, etc. So that is something to keep in mind as your first point, because it will affect everything else and it could undermine everything else. Now, the next 2 points are kind of somewhat similar, but we will start with building and painting. These can be difficult aspects of the hobby. Not everyone is suited to build every single model. They do have some intricacies that can make it more difficult. If you have, let's say, big fingers, you have, let's say, bad eyesight, it might not be ideal to choose a faction that has very small spindly bits. For particular, if we're looking at, say, Harlequins, they have very small models, very difficult to build, and then you have a very small area to paint. So again, don't sabotage yourself by getting a faction that you might like how they play, and maybe you like their lore and how they look, but then you find out that you're not able to build at your comfortable level, and all of a sudden you're being frustrated, you're snipping things wrong, you're scraping things wrong, and you're just breaking your models. There's no point in making the process more difficult for yourself if that is something that you're just not able to do. And it's okay that you're not able to do it. It's not a bad thing. It happens. We can't all be able to build the most intricate things. We have to be aware of it, and if you're not able to use the most delicate pieces, let's go and focus on a faction that has bigger models, that has still what you're looking for in terms of aesthetic and playability, but you're actually able to fix and build those models how you like. I know for some people that might sound harsh, but that is just life. We are not all able to do the most delicate and intricate work. I know my limits when it comes to painting. I enjoy building, and I'm generally able to attack most type of models. Once they get to a certain finesse of them, That's where it kind of stops for me, and I don't bother getting models that are very tiny and unable to put them together properly. So I generally stick to more medium-sized, and I know that from medium up I'm generally decent when it comes to that painting, which is another aspect to take into consideration. When you look online, you're going to get a lot of people who will tell you it doesn't matter, just paint whatever you want, and I would say no to that. I know it seems strange, someone's telling you not to paint your models how you want. This is something that I came into the realization after I was experimenting with random schemes and what I've seen from other people. Generally, there is a reason why most people like to do paint schemes that are on, let's say, your codex, or you might see in a white dwarf. Generally, most people don't have the ability to know what colors match perfectly. We have a general idea of what colors match, but we're not experts when it comes to color like theory, and it's okay if you just want to copy what's in a codex. It's more likely going to be a decent paint scheme that you can find in there that suits your aesthetic, and more importantly, they're not too complicated. This is another thing when you're choosing your models. If you get a model that is very complicated when it comes to painting, and then all of a sudden you're stuck in figuring out paint schemes, figuring out how to combine paints, you are going to have a much more tough time. It's okay to make it simple. Buy a model range that is simple and meets all your other criteria. When you have the ability to go to a more complex painting scheme when it comes to models, go ahead, you should have experience then. But if you are starting, it's okay to first of all choose models that look easy to paint, because that is going to be more motivating for you, and most likely you will learn a bit better than having something super complex and all of a sudden you're well out of your league. It is okay, again, to copy things that are in books or copy schemes that are from other people's collections, but you can see that they work out. You do not have to come up with things by yourself, and do not listen to people who love to tell you to experiment, put any color together. Those people do not have your best interest at heart, because most times when I see that being given as advice, what happens is that the person, they have that initial, I guess they're trying to convince themselves that they like it. They have weird colors that are put together, but over time, we see this similar in things outside of the hobby. We see this quite a lot in fashion. We see a lot in the colors of cars, for example. It is a very good impression that you get and a good feeling when you choose this thing that might be out of the ordinary and it seems new and exotic. Over time, your liking over that color goes down dramatically. That's why certain colors, when you're wearing a suit, when you're wearing a specific outfit, there are certain colors that are always liked and are always in fashion, because those colors are timeless. So I know this sounds strange when someone's telling you not to just randomly color whatever you feel like and telling you not to color your models how you think they should. It sounds strange, but I honestly think that from the experience that I've seen and people's leaving the hobby with the paint schemes that they've come up with, it generally suits better that, let's say if you are looking at Space Marines and you simply copy a color of a chapter that you really like, that person is more likely to stay within the hobby than to leave, because there is a lot of, I guess, subconscious feeling when it comes to the hobby. And when you can't build something, when it's fiddly to do something, when the paint scheme doesn't really hit you anymore as it should because you've passed that honeymoon stage, it all adds up. It gives you a negative feeling towards the hobby, and you are more likely to leave than stay. It sounds strange, but I understand why Games Workshop uses Space Marines, and in particular Ultramarines, as the poster boys of the Warhammer 40k hobby as a whole. The models are fairly easy to build, pretty straightforward. Nothing is complex when it comes to details, unless you get, let's say, more complex hero HQ characters. Very easy to paint, considering that most of it is a pretty nice smooth armor. So I understand why that is being pushed as the main thing for a new beginner. It really makes sense that they tell you to start with your Space Marines, and of course, since Ultramarines are on every box, they normally have the kits, and especially the paint kit, suited for that color scheme. Now, moving away from the practical hobby of building and painting, let's look at the overall aesthetics and the lore. Aesthetics can of course be a subjective thing, and this is where the actual thing of saying, oh, choose what you think is looking cool. Yeah, this makes sense to have as one piece of the whole puzzle. Yes, you should also take into consideration what models you think look cool, with an addition of all the other ones, all the other points that I've been mentioning. If you like doing melee combat and you like painting somewhat easy models to build and paint, maybe Khorne Berserkers might not be ideal because the armor trim is very complex. Now, you might like the lore and they might look cool, but it might not hit all the other things. So it's something that you need to take into consideration. But there obviously are other melee combat armies that hopefully you like the aesthetic look of, how their models are shaped, how they are posed, what trinkets they might have on them. Generally, what I find is that lore is not as important when it comes to choosing your faction. From what I've seen, most people are able to participate and enjoy the lore of an army, even if that is not the first thing that they choose. So as long as they get all the other aspects of choosing a faction, so when it comes to the actual way they play, the way they build, and the way they paint, generally the lore can be adapted to. So in a sense, this is kind of an opposite thing, right? Once you get those three initial points of how they play, how they build, and how they paint, then you can obviously look at the aesthetic choice, what you think is cool, the rule of cool, and lore can be adapted too. So even though you might like a faction's lore, if they don't meet the other criteria, forget about the lore, focus on choosing a faction that has those other bits, and lore can be adapted to. You don't have to really worry about it, so don't focus too much on the lore, because what I find is that most people, once they meet the other criteria and they're able to actually enjoy that part of the hobby, they will be able to get into the lore of any faction that comes up. I know I've probably rambled on a bit here and things seem a bit jumbled, so let me kind of break this down back into bullet points of when you're joining the hobby, what you should be looking at. First and foremost, the point is that you need to be okay with how a faction plays. If you're looking for melee combat, don't choose a faction that is more likely to be focused on a particular ranged combat. Some factions are able to obviously switch in between, and they have that ability to do both. Now obviously certain factions might be better suited and are more experienced in this particular type of combat, but you need to figure out how you actually want to play. For point number 2, that you are suited to be able to build the actual models. Don't choose something that is too small for you. You're not able to figure out all the intricate details, and you're not able to build a model to your own personal standard, I suppose. That will really affect you, and it will really ruin the hobby for you. The third point, which again is similar to the building one, make sure that you have a model that you are comfortable to paint. It is okay to copy paint schemes that are in the codex. Don't listen to people who just tell you to do whatever paint scheme you want. Most likely you will kick the legs from underneath you if you just choose random paint schemes without any experience. If you have experience, that point is irrelevant to you. I'm sure you'll be able to figure that out. But if you do not have experience, it is okay to copy. Do not listen to people who tell you to put any paint on it. Then your fourth point is the actual aesthetics. As long as you can hit the first 3, then you are able to choose the rule of cool. That is the 3 points that most people skip, and they just tell you to go to the rule of cool. Choose anything that just because you like the look of it. It sounds great at first, But if you don't hit those first 3 points, you are more likely to sabotage yourself in the long run. You will start to not like aspects of your hobby, whether it's building, painting, or just how your army plays. If you focus too much and only on the rule of cool, you will most likely be selling your models on Facebook Marketplace at a discount because you are no longer enjoying the hobby. It happens so frequently, you would be surprised how many people get into that situation. And it is one of those things where I have seen them from the beginning, where they come in and they're told to just go with the rule of cool. They're not really told about the first 3, and eventually they get to selling their models because they want out of the hobby. Last and 5th point is the lore. Most lore is pretty decent within the Warhammer 40k universe, so don't be worried too much about having to choose your lore, because most factions have something interesting about them, and as long as you can enjoy the first 3 and eventually the first 4, you will eventually be able to get into, figure out, and enjoy the lore of any faction within the game. Hopefully that makes sense and those points are able to help you out. I know that this might be a bit contentious and people might be disagreeing with you, but the reason why I wanted to do this video is because, as I said, far too often I see people join the hobby, they're given bad advice because people like to be nice and not provide you with a proper feedback on how to join the hobby, and then eventually that person starts to see the cracks and they no longer like the hobby and off they go. So hopefully if you follow these steps, and it's not as complex as it might sound. Obviously I've been rambling a bit too much and I'm probably making it a bit more complicated than it should be, but if you follow those steps in how you choose your army, you're more likely going to enjoy each aspect of the hobby that much more than if you were just choosing the rule of cool. And the important part is that hopefully if you follow these steps, go through your choosing, building, painting, you will get to a scenario where you will be invested, you will enjoy the hobby, and there's not going to be as many cracks if you didn't follow those steps. Hopefully if you're getting into the hobby in 2025, you are going to start on a better foot than just the rule of cool. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people who disagree with me, and most likely you will not be able to change my mind. It's just the amount of things that I've seen where other people join the hobby and leave because of the rule of cool, and that's all they were told. Whether it's building, whether it's choosing factions, whether it's painting. Far too often people are just told rule of cool, that's it, that's all you need to know. And guess what? You see their models being sold on Facebook Marketplace. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you would like to argue, go for it. Put them in the comments. Whether or not I'll respond, I'm sure I'll give you a little snarky reply. You know, hopefully this will help new beginners get into the hobby. It's not as complex as people make it out to be, but it's also not as simple as people make it out to be. Do put in a bit more thought into what you're going to do, because you are going to be spending money on this. So having only one point to think about when you're spending quite a bit of money doesn't quite make sense. At the end of the day, if you're going to buy a car, you're not just going to look on the outside and how it looks. You will be more interested what functionalities it has on the inside, what comforts, what type of seats, what type of air conditioning, what type of media station, etc. So make sure to focus on some of the other points and you will definitely enjoy the hobby a lot more than if you didn't. So for now, I hope you enjoyed this video. Drop your comments down below. For me, for 2025, if you've been keeping up with some of my other videos, I do plan on building the rest of my Black Templars so that I can use them for tournaments. I also have my Bretonians that I have been building up, and hopefully I will be starting to paint them soon, though again, there's so much. It'll probably take a while before I even prime them. Hopefully everything gets done. We have a long road of painting and building for this year. If you have any other topics that you'd like for me to discuss, tell me down below. I will try and make some videos that may be a bit better than this one. I know this one's kind of off the cuff and not particularly scripted, so it might not be as well thought out, but hopefully you've enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, really helps us out. Make sure you're subscribed. And I guess for now, until next time, take care, folks.